A lot of you know how I came up with this. I don't know, I'm not going to call it brilliant, but this idea to put wire onto embellish on the wood turnings. I woke up in the middle of the night and somebody said, hey, you should put wire on the wood turning. You know, that'd be something that would look good. So immediately I thought, well, this shouldn't be too bad. Well, I've only done 3 in a year and about 4 months. The first one frustrated me so much, that's this one. And I'll talk about some of the problems with that and with doing wire radially around your wood turning. But it is an interesting medium to be able to use. I've got a turtle theme that I've had for years and years and years. So I said, let me put a turtle in this ginger jar, and that's where it started. So that piece is over here. I'll pass it around in a minute. But it's expanded from there, and getting into this program, one of the things that I would like to do is get some other interest from other turners into Inlay, because the wire Inlay, because there's so many things that I didn't know and I still don't know, so it's all trial and error kind of thing with me. And with doing this, I know Jim has done some wire on some of his carvings for embellishment, but I don't know whether he's done any of the larger pieces yet or not. But I'd really like to get some interest in it, and maybe we can figure out a way to do this better and cleaner and easier, and, you know, start something. There's nothing on YouTube. I searched YouTube after that morning. I probably searched YouTube for 3 or 4 hours trying to find anybody that was doing brass wire inlays. So if anybody comes up with a brass wire YouTube tutorial, let me know what it is. I'd love to see it and see if I can get some tips from it.
We're going to have one next month.
Do what?
We're going to have one next month.
Are you?
You.
You're out. So, here is one of the things that I looked at and figured that if I'm going to put a design like, let me go back over here.
Got to point it this way, bud.
To the turtle. To the turtle, I said, you know, I'm not going to do anything flat, but in working with the turtle shape, I felt that you need to have some nice flowing lines, not flat, but you need to have something that you're going to be able to put a groove in and also be able to get your wire to stay in place for you, because you're looking at several different planes as you're trying to go into a radius and into an ellipse. So that's one of the things that I would recommend, is that when you have an idea for doing this, if anyone does decide they want to get into this, is avoid anything with sharp corners or non-smooth radiuses or ellipses on it. So that's the first thing. And then figure out how you're going to lay your piece out for your inlay. You know, you can size things that are proportional and make it look good. But, you know, the first couple of layouts that I put on it, it was like, no, this isn't going to work. So I pared things down a little bit, and that made things run a little bit smoother for me. One of the other things is to deal with the thickness. Everybody wants to do thin wall, thin wall, thin wall. If you're going to be doing a design and you're going to be laying wire into it, you've got to remember the thickness or the depth that you're going to be laying that wire into, so you don't get too thin and run yourself out the back into the inside of your vessel or your piece. And I did that on a practice piece. I got it too thin, and then when I took the piercing tool in to lay the channel for the design, I zipped through it in a couple spots and didn't realize it. So that's the other thing. Maybe not as thick as I've got, but I think you need to be aware that you've got a depth that you're looking at of the wire, and you need to get that depth at least half the thickness. And I'll go into some of that here in a minute. Okay, creating the channels for this inlay, I used for the radial portions, I used a real thin parting tool that Ron had let me use, which worked very well. I also used on some subsequent pieces, I used one of the carbide tools with the point on it. I also used a skew on edge and just worked it back and forth to both get the depth and the width of the channel that I put in for the radial. That worked well. And that's why I mentioned earlier is the fact that you've got to make sure that you get your wire fully embedded. So you want that at least halfway. Probably better is to lay the entire thickness of the wire in so that it's flush with your rough turn piece, because you're going to be putting a file on it later, and you're also going to be sanding and trying to get everything smoothed out and running the same. One of the things that I found with the piercing tool, it was very hard to control the depth of the piercing tool. So, it's all free-handed. So you're sitting there trying to do a design that you want, but you're also, you've got to be cognizant of what you're getting for the depth on that. So that was why I said earlier, make your walls a little bit thicker, or figure out some way of making your hand move at the right depth on this.
Could you do multiple passes?
You could. One of the things with multiple passes, I found I tried using some other tools. The piercing tool worked great because of the high RPMs. So you were able to get through the grain changes as you were making the design on mine, the turtle. And it made it a lot easier, but just doing it with one pass. But yeah, I guess you could go through. That machine's running pretty quick, and my hands are, I've got a little bit of shape in my hands anyway, so if I can get through it in one pass, if I tried to get that same line the next time, it probably wouldn't be in the same place and I'd have something too wide. But yeah, to get the depth, you certainly could take multiple passes at it. I gotta get my sheet here. I have sheet notes on this that aren't up here on this.
My thought on the multiple passes is the next pass, your existing group would be guiding to be able to have more control. But it may not be that way.
Well, that's a great start. You got something to start working with, and let us know how that works. So I would encourage you to try that. I mean, if you're interested in doing it, definitely encourage you to try it. Maybe that's a better way of skinning the cat. I don't know. I only took one pass. I don't know why, but I tried to do it. The tool, the piercing tool, went right through it, so it wasn't a problem trying to do it in one pass to get the depth I needed. Choice of wire and the gauge wire that you use should be proportionate, obviously, to what you're doing. On this particular piece, I probably should go ahead and send this around. We got a picture of it up there. On this particular piece, I used 12 gauge wire, and you can get the wire size from 12 to, I only saw one place that had 10 gauge wire. 10 is pretty heavy. So if you're doing radial, you could probably get away with a 10 gauge wire. Yeah, Jim?
What kind of wire do you use? The copper, brass?
I used on this a soft brass. Most of the wires that I looked at were brass. I looked at nickel, I looked at silver, they have gold, I looked at copper. One of the things, and I've got that in here, is you want to use a dead soft wire. Any other type of wire has more brittleness, and I don't think that my rationale was that the brittleness would probably work against you because you're bending it, you're twisting it for design, you're turning it, and with brittle wire, the more you move it, the more brittle it gets. It's just one of the characteristics of wire. The more you work it, the more brittle and the harder it'll get. So I use dead soft wire on this, but you can get wire down to almost thread if you ever want to do anything that thin. But I use 12 gauge for the piece that's going around. And I think it matched pretty well the proportion for both the design and both for the radial. That was the second piece I did. I've got another piece here I'll pass around in a minute that was my first piece. And so that's one of the things you can do. I think on the next piece was the next piece I'll show you is the ginger jar. And I've got this backwards. That piece was 14 gauge that you got there, and the ginger jar that I'm going to pass around was 12 gauge. So that was 14 gauge material. I talked about the tools to do the inlay. Obviously, anything that's radial you should be able to do with normal turning tools. You know, you're doing a radial cast to get both your depth and your width of your wire groove. I tried a couple of other tools, and I used a Dremel type tool that Marv had gotten. It turned, I think, about 45,000 RPM, and it was very hard to control it when you would start going into opposing or crossing grain. It wants to run and ride the track of the grain. I tried a smaller Dremel tool that was turning about 25, and it was like, there's no way I can do this. I couldn't keep control of the grooves for the design. And it ended up, you know, I asked Ron if I could use his piercing tool, and I did use that, and it went through like butter. So it was, it's probably the best piece, but if you can find a Dremel type tool and you've got soft enough wood, or that the grain is not as difficult, you might be able to do it with another type of Dremel type tool. One of the things that you also need to do is, especially with the design, the turtle. I started out, I had some very sharp corners, I had some sharp angles that I had to get into. So I modified it. The piece that's going around is actually, you know, a revision to what I did on the first one of the same type. But you want to keep your groove and your design such that it too is kind of flowing. You don't want to have sharp corners. You don't want to do 90s. You want to be able to make a flowing turn. So, you know, it's more somewhat abstract to get the design, but you want to keep and make sure that you don't kill yourself trying to get a single piece of wire around to make your shape. And so you can look at that and you can see where we started. I started and stopped the design at the tail with the inlay of the wire, and that was where my only joint was at. So you want to try to make sure that your design gives you some flexibility and you don't beat yourself up or have to cut wire every place and have a joint, because getting the joint sometimes is a little difficult also. I will tell you that after the last piece I'm going to show you, which is still a piece of work in progress, I'm thinking now that doesn't matter what kind of wood you use, the movement on anything radial is going to change, and it's going to pop the wire out, and you're going to have to recut and reset it, which is harder than doing it the first time around. So I talked to Bobby today about maybe doing, where is he? Yeah. I talked to Bobby about maybe doing multiple pieces on the radial with an actual, put something into it that complements the design of some inlay. The one thing I found was that none of the turquoise inlay on this moved. And the other thing that didn't move was the wire within the turtle. Now, I don't know why, but none of it moved, none of it popped, everything stayed in place, but everything that was radial, I got a lot of movement out. To the point that the last piece that I'm going to send around, which has some of the problems with this, been sitting for a year. It's been sitting since June of last year when I initially inlaid it. In September I went back because it had popped. I cut, relayed in, and I didn't pull it off the shelf until this week. And 2/3 of the radials have popped because the wood is still shrunk that much in a year. So that's one of the problems.
Do you recommend shaping your wire before you put it in, or shaping it in the groove?
I actually, on my first go-around, on a sample piece that I did at the house before I even went to the shop, was I tried to use a little jig to try to pre-shape it. One of the problems, and especially with the pieces I did, if it was flatter it might work a little bit, but I found that when you've got the curve of the vessel this way,
yeah,
and you've got the curve this way, running it on the jig really didn't help me because I was having to rebend it to get it into the grooves anyway.
okay.
So, and with the dead soft wire, and again, if you use smaller diameter wire, smaller gauge, thinner gauge wire, it becomes a little bit easier. But it was just as easy for me to go ahead, just lay it into the track and the channel as I went along. So, kind of getting started into that part of the process. What I did was I did my radials first. I put those in, and I started with thin CA glue and got one end into place down into the channel, and then I took and continued to run it around. I got an approximate size so I wasn't dealing with the entire roll of wire, and I cut it off, and then I just started running a medium thin CA glue into the channel, tapping it down into it. I think I've got a couple of slides down here where I was doing that. That was one of the starts right there. You can see the wire down here in this area that was hanging out. I pre-cut that, and I was starting with the thin CA glue, getting that piece started. After you get it started, then it's just a matter of tapping it in with a small ball peen or a tack hammer or whatever you're comfortable with using, tacking that into your land and running it around until you get to the other end. So, yeah, once you've got that set, a pair of needle nose pliers. I just got a pair of needle nose pliers and that probably most of you already have a small ball peen hammer. Is what I used on that. And you take that, you run it in, and you help guide it with your fingers, and it really does want to lend itself to laying down into that groove. And you want to run that CA in and hit it with the accelerator. That's why I used the medium thin, which gave me a little more drying time. but then once you get it tapped into the groove, you want to make sure you get that stuck in place so it isn't popping itself back up. Because the wire does have some memory to it, so it's going to want to rebound and pull itself back. What have I got here? One of the big things that you also have to really be aware of when you're laying the CA glue in is not get too much in, because it'll follow the track that you've routed into the piece, and it'll follow it. And at some point, it'll get down to the end of it, it starts building up. And I can tell you from experience, digging that back out when you've only got maybe an inch or two of wire left, and you're trying to dig out that end where you started, and now you're getting in there and you've got a big glob of CA glue built up. So that's one of the things I would tell you from doing this 3 times now. That was one of the things that I worked hard on this last week to do, and made it much easier. Try to depress the wire. Try to get it down. First, you got to make sure you've got the depth when you're routing out your piece of equipment, so that you can, or routing out your piece, so that you can get that wire fully embedded. You need to be at least half the diameter. One of the other things is, if you don't, what happens with that is when you put the file on it, you start sanding it, pretty soon you've got nothing left but the bottom half or less of the wire, of the gauge of the wire, and now it starts getting to be brittle, because even with the heat from sanding and filing, you're tempering that wire a little bit, so it becomes a little more brittle. So make sure that when you get your lands set either on your radial or on your design, you get them deep enough, and then make sure when you're laying it in and gluing it, that you get the wire fully down into the track and into the lands. At the end, I had tried grinding it and filing it. I found that it was very tough trying to get that last couple of inches of wire to the grinder with the vessel, and so I have tried very hard to get the proper length when I cut it, and I cut it with square nose crimps. So it's probably the better way to do it. Even though I've got file it's tough to file brass anyway, and if you got more than just a hair, you're going to be there for a while trying to do it. So cutting it is probably the best way to do it to get your desired fit. I think I got a picture in here when I got down to that point. There's one where I'm trying to dig it out with the end of a pair of needle nose pliers. That glue had built up at the end. And then this is where I did the end nip. And square nip pliers or cutters. I think these things ran about 12 or 13 bucks online, but they're jewelry type pliers, and they'll give you a square cut or a bevel cut. So it's just a matter of which way you're turning it to get the cut. But always start out with a square and try to end up with a square as tight as you can.
So did you see the wire is square?
No, the pliers are square cut. Pliers.
Yeah, you don't want to use a pair of nips like this, because you're going to get a bevel cut on both sides. It's squeezing it, and you're going to get a cut that's coming in like this. So you're going to want to invest if you do this, you're going to want to invest in a pair of square nose pliers. The lights sit up here.
Pardon me?
Lights be pointing up here, not over there.
Can you turn, you said file the wire. It's soft brass, right? Can't you turn that just right on the lathe with your tools?
You might be able to. I haven't tried it.
You should be able to.
I personally wouldn't want to put normal tools, normal turning tools on it. The carbide might work. I actually thought about that as I was dealing with this piece, which I'll go ahead. That's the piece that's been going around. This one's still a piece in work and in progress, but I think you probably could put the carbide on it and not get any catches.
Because I inlay pewter all the time.
Do you? Pewter's a lot softer than brass.
But I pour it.
Yeah.
I pour it. You know, I heat it in a cauldron and I pour it. And then I turn it away. I do aluminum also, aluminum. No, you know, so that you should be able to cut it with normal tools. Should be able.
But you actually pour the wire into whatever you're
Right.
you're using for the embellishment. Okay.
And I make aluminum finials out of just bar stock aluminum, but regular tools.
And you turn it with regular tools? You have to sharpen it a lot, or?
Yeah, but not as much as you might think.
Okay. My concern was that it would catch.
Yeah.
It would be easy to get a catch with
And pull all the wire
with
out.
bowl gouges or spindle gouges or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why I didn't try it. But again, you know, that's something I thought about the other day, about using the carbide, the square carbide, to run to get that last cut on the wire, and it would take away some of the file work. So. Okay, once I got everything laid into the piece, I went to a sanding speed on the lathe, and I took a fine file. Most of you guys probably have these, just a file with something so you're not going to get your hand stuck at the end. And this and a file card is probably all you need. You're going to want to run and get any of the wire that's above the plane of your piece down to as flush as you can. On this particular piece that I've got the photographs of, it was an easy angle to hold, and I could catch both of the inlays, both of the wires, pretty much at the same time, because it was on a straight plane across that edge. And that's the piece that's going around. So you're running at a fairly slow speed. You're not running at well, at least I stand at a slower speed. You guys may not, but I put it at probably 500 RPM or as low as the machine I was on, just about as slow as it would go. And just file it off, and just be careful, because you got a tool that isn't really made for wood turning, and you're trying to do something with it. So, and then that gets you down to where you can sand and use your normal sanding process. I mean, obviously, with the file, every once in a while, I would get, especially on the turtle pieces, the two holes, the pitcher and the ginger jar. It wasn't quite as an easy process as this. I was dealing with a single plane. There, you're dealing with multiple planes because of the radial turn of the piece and on the ellipse also. So it was. I got a couple of times. I got a catch going around trying to move over the turtles on the inlay, and it's a little bit of a start. And then one time I actually pulled one of the pieces of wire out on the radials when I got a little bit of a catch. So you don't want to keep the flat part in. You don't want to catch the corner of the file. on your inlay, on your brass inlay. So. Okay. Okay, so once you've gotten your wire down to pretty much flush with the rest of the surface of your project, you want to go ahead and finish your sanding, go through the normal sanding process that you use. On the woods that I was working with, mahogany and the maple, the wood under sanding, if you're trying to take the brass down, you can't just focus just on the brass, so you're catching the wood on either side of it. You're taking more wood out. So if you get to a point where you've over sanded, then you're going to need to go back and go through and put the file on it again to get the brass down. So that's a kind of a critical point in time, so that you don't over sand your piece and get that differential of what you're taking off of the metal and what you're taking off of the wood, because the wood's going to come off much faster and much easier. So reapply the file if you need to, and get it back to the same plane and level to the adjacent surfaces. As I said, I had some sheet notes. So for materials, you've got, like I said, there's all kinds of wire types that you can use. But I would suggest that you use dead soft material because of its malleability. It's going to work easier. It won't get brittle as fast. It doesn't start out as a more brittle product. This stuff's fairly easy to come by. You can get it, like I said earlier, in different types of material. You can get silver, you can get gold, brass, copper, nickel, almost any type of wire that you know of, you can probably buy. There are several sites on the internet, and I've got a list of those here. And again, they come in sizes. I think I've seen some 10. But most of the sizes are mostly, every place that I've looked is 14 and smaller. Several sites have 12 gauge, and I've only seen one site that's had 10 gauge material. But I think, personally, I don't think I have anything that I'm going to do that I'd be using 10 gauge material.
But do you use round wire or square wire?
Right here. Square or half round wire would work well for the circumferences. When you're running radially around your piece, you could probably use square wire or half round wire that, I'm not sure where it would get you ultimately. Half wire, if you've gotten a little too deep and you're past the plane, anything that you take off, or if you're a little high, anything you take off is going to reduce the width. Once you've gotten to half, anything you take off now is going to make the width of that wire smaller. So, but that would be the place you could probably use square or half round. I used round all the way through. But for all of the designs, the turtles, I don't know how you could really use square or half round, because as you're turning and bending back, the wire wants to twist naturally, and to try to keep it from twisting, I really don't know how you could practically control it and keep it from twisting. That was a great segue, Lance. Right there. Like I said, I tried to use a bending jig, but because of the memory of the wire and wanting to get back in and moving it into place, you know, the bending jig really didn't work like I thought it would.
I've heard, I don't know the details of it, but you can heat the wire to soften it and also to fix in the bends, but I don't know the details about how hot or anything like that.
You know, the more and more I read about wires and the differences, if there's any electricians here, you probably know that the more you bend, and when you're bending copper wire, you heat it, it becomes brittle, it becomes harder. So heating it, I don't know.
Heating it softens it. It anneals it, softens it back up again.
So, but how would you heat
The
the
more,
wire?
the
With
more
a
you
torch?
work it, the more you work it, the harder it gets. In order to soften it up, you have to heat it to soften it back up.
You know, my logic was, if you bend wire, you're heating it. You're heating it up in a sense.
You're hardening it. Yeah.
You are hardening it.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess you could heat it with a torch or something. You know, you're dealing with a very short period of time unless you want to go through that, and then now you're into, how do I get my fingers in here to push this into the land with a hot piece of wire?
You let it
No, you
cool
let it
down.
cool and it'll stay soft.
Will it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
when
that's
you heat-
a
when you
good
heat it,
idea.
You anneal it, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's
You
softens
might
it
want
up.
to
That's
do some
good.
research on that. Also, check to see what jewelers do with their wires, what kind of wires they use.
They use gold.
well,
Somebody used to make
one of
that
the
jewelry
places
wire
that I
jewelry.
looked at wire and looked at information was on Jewelry Supply Company. So that's one of the spaces that I bought some of the materials that I'm using. Amazon.com, you can get anything on Amazon. I got a bunch of wire up here. If you guys want to look at it, I mean, it's just copper, some brass, and some, yeah, not platinum. It's not sterling. It's a chromium wire. So, but these are places that I bought all the stuff that I used on these pieces. I got one more piece that I'm gonna send around. This is the first one I did, and I learned a lot from it. And one of the very big things that I have learned is that after repeatedly having to take the radials, recut them after this wood shrinks. This has been done twice, and the last time, like I said, was about a year ago, and almost all the wire has popped because the wood has still continued to shrink. The second piece that I sent around was a piece of maple from a furniture it had been kiln dried, architectural millwork company I had gotten it from. So that's kiln dried. It had less than 3% moisture in it when I turned it, and it still moved. In 2 weeks, I was over at Mars on Sunday. I had to cut the wire in 3 places and glue it back in. So even cured, seasoned, dry wood still moves.
Humidity.
Yeah, it's hard for me to believe that that would have done that, but it was really a surprise. So that's one of the things that maybe if the next piece I do, I'll let it sit for a year before I even inlay the wire, and maybe I can mitigate some of it. But this is just a few of the pictures that we took.
Bud,
Yes.
on checking on dryness, could you be weighing this?
You could. I mean, that's the easiest way, is to use a digital scale and get your starting weight, your end weight, and then how much moisture has come out. I actually happened to have, after the hurricane, I had the use of a moisture meter because I was checking to see if I had any leaks around my windows or up in my crawl space. And I actually threw it on this piece of material. And it was about 3% humidity, so, yes, sir.
I would suggest trying Mine Shaft. It's a company, excuse me, they're located west of Home Depot on Copens Road, back in an area. They have a lot of different materials for jewelry making, and I bought from them wires of different dimension, 10 gauge especially.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good thickness. So it's mine
Shaft.
shaft, off of Copens and
Yeah, they're probably in the phone book, but I don't, you know.
Just west of
And Michael's also has a lot of the jewelry tools, especially
yeah.
wires.
I've actually seen these in Michael's and also in
Joanne?
one of the other Joanne's. They have these, and they run 11 to 14 bucks where you go. One of the other things that I found as problems and other things that I didn't have in this original tutorial was I mentioned to release all of the designs, had absolutely no problem with the outlines of those turtles. Not a single thing popped on those. So I have no idea why the radials would pop and
Probably more friction.
More what?
More friction of the wood,
Okay, well, that was something that said, okay, maybe I stay away from the radials and just do designs. The CA glue control I mentioned, that buildup is, like I said, it's a pain in the butt, trying to get in there in that small land and the thickness of a 12 or 14 gauge wire to get in and try to dig out the buildup at the end where you started. And again, trial and error. I mean, this started with a whim and an idea that I woke up to in the middle of the night and asked some of the experienced turners, and I got these kind of deer in the headlight, Inlay wire into your pieces.
Why the wood shrinking? If you keep that unit in the car, it's the wire which expands.
The last piece that is the one that has the most goose, which was the first one I did, has been sitting since I reset the wire in my house on top of my curio cabinet in an air-conditioned environment that stayed constant, and it's still popped. So it is, and again, it was only the radials, the designs, nothing on the turtles, on the two pieces that I did the turtles on, none of it popped. And that picture stayed in my car longer than the first one did. So, but you're right, I guess the heat could have had some effect on that. So, yeah, Jim.
A couple of tools you can use. I do a lot of working with wire with birds' feet, and there's a pair of pliers, I think I showed it to you.
You did.
They're round, you buy them at Sears, and you can bend wire with them and they won't crimp. And also they're called wire benders, and they're like elastic tubes out of metal. And you can put the wire in there and you can bend it. I think I will show this to you too. So if you're going to do like the turtle thing, and you're going to do or you just make a circle, you can use those little pliers. I had to look all over. I found them at Sears and Craftsman.
Yeah, those would probably be far better than just the standard pair of needle nose that I would use to try to twist and roll it. It does have a round edge, but what you showed me was far better idea. So, well, any more questions? Well, I hope to get feedback from this. I hope somebody says, I'm going to try this and and bring back some good feedback on it.